I was supposed to be in Afghanistan for another 3 weeks. That's why I didn't tell Caroline I was coming home early. I wanted to surprise her at our beach house, the one I'd worked extra deployments to afford. But the real surprise was waiting for me behind those ocean view windows. What happened next would change everything, and no one, especially not my wife and her lover, saw it coming. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The military transport touched down at 400 hours. After 11 months in the dust and danger of Helmand Province, the humid coastal air hit me like a wall as I stepped onto American soil. Everything smelled different, cleaner, sweeter, like possibility. I inhaled deeply, savoring that first. A breath of home. Captain Reynolds clapped me on the shoulder as we walked across the tarmac. "Mitchell, you sure you don't want to crash at my place tonight? It's a 2-hour drive to your beach house." I shook my head, adjusting the duffel bag slung over my shoulder. "Thanks, but I've been dreaming about surprising Caroline for months." I checked my watch, 5:30 a.m. now. If I leave right away, I can be there by the time she wakes up. Reynolds gave me a knowing smile. "Man, she's going to lose it when she sees you. How long has it been since your last leave?" 4 months, I replied, the weight of every day apart heavy in my voice. But this time I'm home for good. The early release from my deployment had been unexpected. Budget cuts and troop reductions meant our unit was being pulled out sooner than planned. Only a handful of people knew I was stateside, and I'd sworn them all to secrecy. I wanted to see Caroline's face light up when she saw me standing at the door of our beach house. Wanted to sweep her into my arms after nearly a year apart. I'd purchased the oceanfront property in North Carolina's Outer Banks 3 years ago, before my second deployment. It had been a dream of ours since we first started dating in college. A place where we could build memories, start a family one day. I'd taken extra rotations, volunteered for hazard pay assignments, saved every penny to make it happen. The beach house represented everything I was fighting for, our future. Caroline had moved there permanently 6 months ago, taking a remote position with her marketing firm so she could enjoy the peaceful shoreline while I finished my service. Our video calls had the soundtrack of waves crashing in the background. Sometimes she'd position her laptop so I could see the sunset over the water, a small mercy while I was stationed in a dusty forward operating base. "We miss you around here, Sergeant Mitchell," said the rental car agent at the airport, an older man with the weathered face of a former serviceman. He refused to let me pay. "Your wife comes in here every few weeks, shows everyone pictures from your deployment. She's real proud of you." I felt a lump form in my throat. Caroline had always been my biggest supporter, enduring the long separations, the missed anniversaries, the constant worry. This surprise was as much for her as it was for me, a way to make up for all the time we'd lost. The coastal highway was deserted at that early hour, making the drive faster than expected. I rolled down the windows, letting the salt air fill the car. The sun was just beginning to lighten the horizon as I turned onto the private road leading to our community of beachfront homes. I rehearsed what I might say when I saw her. Part of me wanted to just hold her, to memorize again the feeling of her in my arms. It had been too long since I'd breathed in the scent of her hair, felt the softness of her skin. Video calls and photographs couldn't replace the simple reality of presence. As I approached our street, I noticed something odd. Several cars were parked along the road near our house, a black Mercedes I didn't recognize, a red convertible, and a few others. It was barely 7:30 a.m. Who would be visiting at this hour? My first thought wasn't suspicion, just confusion. Maybe Caroline had house guests she hadn't mentioned during our last call. Or perhaps she'd organized some kind of welcome breakfast, having somehow discovered I was coming home. But I'd been so careful to keep it a secret. I parked a few houses, down, not wanting the sound of the engine to alert her if this was just a coincidence. The morning was quiet except for the distant crash of waves and the occasional cry of seagulls. Our beach house stood against the brightening sky, its weathered, blue exterior and white trim exactly as I remembered. The American flag I'd hung before leaving still fluttered from the front porch. Caroline had promised to keep it there until I returned, but something was different. The patio lights were on, unusual for this time of day, and through the large windows facing the ocean I could see movement inside. Our house was definitely not empty. I grabbed my duffel and walked slowly up the shell-lined path to our front door. My key turned quietly in the lock. I stepped inside, expecting perhaps to find Caroline in the kitchen starting breakfast, maybe with a friend or family member who had stayed over. The entryway was littered with unfamiliar items. A man's leather jacket hung on our coat rack, a pair of expensive sunglasses I'd never seen before sat on the console table, and 2 empty wine glasses remained on the coffee table, alongside an open bottle of Cabernet, Caroline's favorite. "Babe, can you bring another towel when you come back up?" a man's voice called from upstairs. Our bedroom. I froze, my duffel bag slipping from my shoulder to the floor with a muffled thud. The voice didn't belong to anyone. I knew, not her brother, not our neighbors, not any friend I could recall. Sure thing, just a sec. Caroline's voice floated down the stairwell, followed by her footsteps. She hummed softly as she descended, a tune I didn't recognize. She didn't see me at first, her attention focused on the linen closet in the hallway. She looked beautiful, her dark hair longer than when I'd left, her skin tanned from days on the beach. She wore only an oversized t-shirt that skimmed her thighs. My t-shirt. When she turned and saw me standing in the entryway, the stack of towels fell from her hands. "James?" My name came out as barely a whisper, her face draining of color. You're not supposed to be home." Those words, not welcome home or I've missed you, or any of the things I'd imagined hearing, struck me like a physical blow. "Clearly," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt as I gestured to the evidence scattered around our living room. For several seconds, we just stared at each other across the space that had never felt so vast. I could see the calculations happening behind her eyes, explanations forming and dissolving as she realized there was no plausible story to cover this. "Who is he?" I finally asked, though I already knew the answer. Before she could respond, footsteps sounded on the stairs. A man appeared behind her, tall, tanned, with the kind of casual confidence that comes from never facing real danger. He was wrapped in nothing but a towel, his hair still wet from what I assumed was our shower. He stopped short when he saw me, surprise registering on his face before he quickly composed himself. "You must be the husband," he said, with an accent I couldn't quite place. European, maybe Italian or Spanish. He extended his hand as if we were being introduced at a cocktail party. "Gabriel!" I ignored his outstretched hand, keeping my eyes fixed on Caroline. "How long?" She hugged her arms around herself, suddenly looking small. "James, I can explain how long." Each word felt like glass in my throat. 3 months, she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. It just happened. 3 months, while I was dodging IEDs and losing friends, while I was counting days until I could come home to her, while I was fighting for our future. She was sharing our bed with this stranger. I looked around at the beach house I'd sacrificed so much for, the driftwood coffee table we'd picked out together, the wall of photographs chronicling our history, college graduation, our wedding, my deployment ceremony, the blue throw pillows Caroline had insisted would bring the ocean inside. Everything looked the same, yet nothing was. James, Caroline, took a hesitant step toward me. "Please, let's talk about this. It's not what you think." A bitter laugh escaped me. "Not what I think? What exactly am I misinterpreting here, Caroline? Because from where I'm standing, it looks pretty damn clear." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Gabriel cleared his throat. Perhaps I should go. Perhaps you should have done that before sleeping with my wife in my house, I replied, my voice dangerously calm. The rage building inside me was unlike anything I'd experienced, even in combat. But 11 months in a war zone teaches you control. My commanding officer's words echoed in my head. The most dangerous soldier isn't the one yelling, it's the one who's gone quiet. I was very, very quiet as I picked up my duffel bag and turned toward the door. James, wait, Caroline called out, panic rising in her voice. Where are you going? We need to talk about this. I paused at the doorway, looking back at the woman I'd loved since we were 20 years old, the woman who had promised to wait for me, the woman who had betrayed everything we'd built. You're right, I said, my hand tightening on the doorknob. We do need to talk. I stepped outside, pulling. The door closed behind me. Through the window, I could see Caroline sink to the floor, her face in her hands. Gabriel stood awkwardly beside her, still clutching the towel around his waist, looking every bit the intruder he was. As I walked back to my rental car, the morning sun now fully risen over the Atlantic, I pulled out my phone. I had calls to make, decisions to implement. Because what I was about to do next would change everything. Caroline and her lover had no idea what was coming. I sat in my rental car for several minutes, my knuckles white against the steering wheel, forcing myself to breathe. 11 months in combat had taught me to compartmentalize, to push down emotion and focus on the mission. Right now, that's exactly what I needed to do. I started the engine and pulled away from our beach house. No, my beach house. As I drove, fragments of memories assaulted me. Caroline and I walking hand in hand along the shore the day we closed on the property. Painting the living room together during my last leave. Her voice on late-night calls, telling me how peaceful it was to fall asleep to the sound of waves, all lies, or at least they had become lies. I drove aimlessly at first, needing distance, needing clarity. The coastal road curved alongside the shoreline, past vacation homes and early morning beachgoers, families setting up umbrellas, children chasing waves, normal lives unfolding in the sunshine. How strange that my world could shatter while everyone else's continued without interruption. My phone buzzed with a text. Caroline, James, please come back. We need to talk. It's not what you think. Not what I think. The phrase ignited fresh anger. What exactly was I misinterpreting about finding another man in my shower, wearing nothing but a towel, while my wife walked around in my t-shirt? Another text arrived. I love you. I made a mistake. Please, just talk to me. I turned off my phone. The small town of Seaside Point appeared ahead, its main street just beginning to wake up for the day. I pulled into the parking lot of a diner called Sandy's, a place Caroline and I had visited often during the brief periods I was home. The waitress recognized me as I walked in. Sergeant Mitchell, you're back. Donna was in her 60s, with silver hair and the kind of smile that made her place a local favorite. Where's that pretty wife of yours? She couldn't make it, I managed, sliding into a booth by the window. Donna's expression shifted, reading something in my face. Coffee's on the house today, honey. Welcome home. As I waited for my coffee, I pulled out my phone again, ignoring the stream of texts from Caroline. Instead, I opened my banking app and checked our accounts. Joint checking. Joint savings. The mortgage on the beach house. All of it technically in both our names, but funded almost entirely by my military salary and hazard pay. Caroline's marketing job paid well, but she'd used most of her income for her car, her clothes, her weekly salon appointments. The down payment on the beach house, the renovations, the mortgage payments, those had come from my deployments, my sacrifices. I took a deep breath, and called the one person I knew would give me straight advice. "Mitchell?" Major Wilson's gravelly voice answered on the second ring. "Thought you'd be too busy getting reacquainted with your wife to check in." "Things have changed, sir." I kept my voice level, professional. "I need a recommendation for a lawyer. Today." A pause. "Asset protection or divorce?" "Both." Another pause. "I'll text you a name in 5. Goodman ex-Jag. Handled my sister's divorce from that Wall Street jackass." He didn't ask for details. That's what I appreciated about Wilson. No unnecessary questions. "Thank you, sir." "Mitchell," he said before I could hang up. "Whatever happened, remember your training. Cool head, calculated response." "Yes, sir." The coffee arrived, and I stared into the black liquid, forming a plan. I wasn't going to be like the other guys I'd known, the ones who lost everything in a divorce because they reacted with emotion instead of strategy. Caroline had made her choice. Now I would make mine. My phone buzzed with Wilson's text. "Lawrence Blackwell, 555-7823. Tell him I sent you. He'll fit you in today," I called immediately. "Blackwell Law," answered a crisp, professional voice. "This is Sergeant James Mitchell. Major Wilson gave me your number. I need to speak with Mr. Blackwell about a divorce and asset protection. Today, if possible. One moment, please." The receptionist put me on hold. When she returned, her tone had warmed considerably. "Mr. Blackwell can see you at 10:30 this morning. He says any friend of Major Wilson's is a priority." I checked my watch. It was just past 8 a.m. "I'll be there." With 2 hours to kill, I finished my coffee and decided on my next move. I needed evidence, documentation. After paying for breakfast, I drove to the nearest electronics store. "I need a recording device," I told the sales associate. "Something small, reliable." 30 minutes later, I had what I needed. Next stop, the bank. The local branch of Atlantic Coast Federal was just opening when I arrived. Miranda, the manager who had handled our mortgage, greeted me warmly. "Sergeant Mitchell, welcome home. How was your deployment?" "Educational," I replied. "I need to discuss some changes to my accounts." Her smile faltered slightly. "Of course, let's go to my office." Inside the privacy of her glass-walled space, I got straight to the point. I need to remove my wife's access to my personal accounts and create new accounts solely in my name. Miranda's professional demeanor didn't waver, but her eyes registered. "Understanding. I can help with that. May I ask about your joint accounts?" "Leave them for now, but I need to transfer the majority of the funds out first." She nodded, typing on her computer. "You have significant funds in your joint savings. The most recent deposits are from your deployment pay?" "Yes, all of it." "And the mortgage on your beach property? Is there a way to ensure no changes can be made without my approval?" She smiled, a hint of steel behind it. "As a matter of fact, we have special protections for active duty service members. Let me tell you about them." By the time I left the bank, I had secured my finances as much as legally possible without tipping my hand completely. The large transfers would alert Caroline, but by then I'd be ready for her reaction. I drove to the law office with a growing sense of resolve. Lawrence Blackwell's practice occupied the top floor of a sleek building in downtown Wilmington, about 40 minutes from our beach community. The office exuded quiet confidence. Modern furniture, awards on the walls, framed newspaper articles. About high-profile cases Blackwell had won. The man himself was younger than I expected, maybe early 40s, with the sharp eyes of someone who missed nothing, and the relaxed posture of someone who knew his own worth. "Sergeant Mitchell," he said, shaking my hand firmly. "Wilson speaks highly of you, said you saved his ass in Kandahar." "He exaggerates," I replied, taking the offered seat across from his desk. "Wilson doesn't exaggerate about anything, which is why I cleared my morning for you." He leaned back in his chair. "Tell me what happened and what you want to accomplish." I laid out the situation in clear, concise terms, the facts without the emotion. The beach house purchased primarily with my money, the deployment, coming home early, finding them together. Blackwell listened without interruption, taking occasional notes. When I finished, he nodded once. North Carolina is an equitable distribution. State, not community property, he said. That works in your favor. Courts look at contribution to acquisition of assets, not just whose name is on the title. Your military service and deployment income will be significant factors. What about the fact that she's been living there while I was deployed? Occupancy doesn't trump financial contribution. Based on what you've told me, we have a strong case for the beach house being primarily your separate property. He tapped his pen against his legal pad. What else do you want? I want it done quickly and quietly. I want to protect what I've worked for, and I want to make sure her lover gets nothing. A slight smile crossed Blackwell's face. The third-party involvement actually strengthens our position. I assume you have evidence. I'd thought of the scene I'd walked in on, the wine glasses, the man in a towel, my wife's face when she realized I'd caught her. I can get it. Do that. Document everything, but be careful about recordings. North Carolina requires consent from all parties. Photographs of evidence are better, text messages, emails. I nodded, already planning my next move. One more thing, Blackwell said, his expression serious now. Don't leave the beach house. If you move out, it could be interpreted as abandonment of the property. But they're there now. Not for long. He smiled again, this time with the confidence of a predator who'd spotted weakness. Give me 24 hours. Go to a hotel tonight, keep all receipts. Tomorrow you'll be back in your house, and they'll be the ones looking for accommodations. As I left Blackwell's office, my phone showed 17 missed calls from Caroline and dozens of texts. I scrolled through them quickly. James, please come back. Let me explain. It's not serious, it was a mistake. Where are you? At least, let me know you're safe. I'm worried about you. I love you. Please don't throw everything away. The last message had come through just 10 minutes ago. I'm going to my mother's tonight. Please come home so we can talk. I'll do anything to fix this. Perfect. If she was leaving, I could return to the beach house and begin gathering evidence. Without another confrontation. Not yet. That would come, but on my terms when I was ready. I checked into a hotel near the beach, paid in cash, and kept the receipt as Blackwell had instructed. From the balcony of my room, I could see the ocean stretching toward the horizon. The same view Caroline and I had planned to wake up to every day after my service ended. Now I gazed at that endless blue expanse with different eyes. The horizon wasn't a promise anymore. It was a dividing line between before and after, between trust and betrayal, between the man who had left for deployment and the man who had returned to find his life in shambles. I picked up my phone and finally typed a response to Caroline. I'll be back tomorrow. Have your things packed. We'll talk then. Her reply was immediate. Thank you, James. I love you. We can fix this. I put the phone down without responding. There was nothing to fix, but there was much to be settled. And when it was, Caroline and her lover would understand exactly what happens when you betray a man who spent the last 11 months surviving in a war zone. This wasn't a battle I planned to lose. I returned to the beach house the next morning. Just after sunrise, Caroline's car was gone, as promised. The house looked peaceful from the outside. White curtains gently moving in the breeze through partially opened windows, seagulls perched on the railing of the upper deck. If I didn't know better, I might believe nothing had changed. But everything. Had I used my key to enter, half expecting to find Gabriel still there, lounging on my couch or raiding my refrigerator? Instead, the house was empty, though evidence of their time together remained everywhere. 2 coffee mugs in the sink, a man's watch on the side table, expensive, foreign-looking, a bottle of cologne I'd never seen before in our bathroom. I sat, down my duffel bag, and began a methodical search of the house, taking photos with my phone, as Blackwell had advised. Each new discovery was another knife twist. A restaurant receipt for a romantic dinner dated 3 months ago, while I was dodging. Mortar fire. Men's clothing in the guest room closet. A handwritten note from Gabriel to Caroline, signed with a heart. I was halfway through documenting the evidence when my phone rang. Not Caroline this time, but a number I didn't recognize. "Sergeant Mitchell," I answered. "James, it's Lawrence Blackwell." "Good timing. I've prepared the initial paperwork. How's the evidence collection going?" "Better than expected," I replied, looking at the dozens of photos I'd already taken. They weren't exactly careful about covering their tracks. "Excellent. Now I've filed an emergency motion regarding the property. Given your active duty status and the circumstances, the judge was sympathetic. I'm sending over a document by courier that will effectively secure your right to occupy the property and limit your wife's access until our hearing next week." I felt a surge of satisfaction. "She can't come back without my permission?" "She can. Retrieve essential personal items, but only with advance notice to you, and she can't stay. More importantly, her companion has no legal right to enter the property at all. When does this take effect?" "As soon as you sign the papers. Courier should be there within the hour." After hanging up, I continued my search of the house. In the office, I found Caroline's laptop. She'd always used the same password, our anniversary date, apparently assuming I'd never have reason to check her private communications. I hesitated only briefly before typing it in. The screen unlocked, revealing dozens of open browser tabs. Most were innocent: work projects, beach house decoration ideas, recipes. But her email was also open. The correspondence between Caroline and Gabriel went back nearly 5 months, not the 3 she'd claimed. It had started innocently enough. He was a client at her marketing firm, impressed with her work on a campaign for his import-export business. The emails turned flirtatious, then explicit. Plans were made. Lies were told. I found the email where she told him I wouldn't be home for another 3 weeks, an invitation to make the most of our time. Photos sent back and forth that made my stomach turn. I forwarded everything to my own email account, then to Blackwell. The evidence was damning, comprehensive, and exactly what we needed. Caroline had left a digital trail of her betrayal so clear it might as well have been written in neon. The courier arrived with Blackwell's paperwork just as I finished. I signed everything, took my copy, and watched as he departed to file the rest. It was done. Phase 1 of my plan was complete. I walked through the house, reclaiming my space room by room. In the master bedroom, I stripped the sheets from the bed and stuffed them into a garbage bag. I couldn't bear the thought of sleeping where they had been together. From the closet, I pulled down a set of sheets I'd bought in Germany during a brief leave, ones Caroline had never liked because they were too masculine. Perfect. As I made the bed, my phone buzzed with a text from Caroline. "Mom wasn't feeling well, so I'm coming back tonight instead of tomorrow. We need to talk, James. I love you." I felt a cold smile form. "Don't bother coming back tonight," I texted. "Check your email first." While waiting for her response, I continued my inspection of the house. In the kitchen, I found a shopping list in Caroline's handwriting: oysters, champagne, strawberries, whipped cream. A romantic dinner planned for the man she was sleeping. Within the house I had paid for, my phone rang. "Caroline." "What did you do?" she demanded, her voice shrill with panic. "I protected what's mine," I replied calmly. "The beach house is half mine. You can't just lock me out of my own home." "Actually, I can, and I did. The papers have been filed. Your lover has no right to set foot on the property, and you can only retrieve your personal belongings with advance notice." Her breathing grew ragged. "James, please, it was a mistake. Let's talk about this face to face. We can work it out. Like you worked it out with Gabriel?" "For 5 months, Caroline. Not 3. Silence on the other end, then a whispered, "How did you—" "Your password hasn't changed since our wedding," I said flatly. "Neither has your character, apparently." "You went through my private emails?" Now there was anger in her voice. The audacity of her indignation almost made me laugh. "Yes, just like you went through your wedding vows. I especially enjoyed the photos you sent him while I was deployed. Very patriotic." She began to cry, the kind of theatrical sobs that had always melted my resolve in the past. "James, I'll do anything. I'll go to counseling. I'll quit my job. Gabriel meant nothing to me, I swear." "That's funny, because in one email you told him he was the love of your life." My voice remained steady, emotionless. "You told him you'd never felt this way before, not even with me." The crying stopped abruptly. When she spoke again, her tone had changed completely. "You'll regret this, James. I'm entitled to half of everything. Half the house, half your pension, half your benefits. Your lawyer will advise you to settle quickly and quietly," I interrupted, "unless you want your employer to see those emails sent from your work account, or your parents to see the photos, or your friends to read what you really think about your marriage. You wouldn't I? You don't seem to know me very well anymore, Caroline. Maybe you never did." I ended the call and blocked her number. Then I opened a beer from the fridge, walked out onto the deck, and watched the waves crash against the shore as the sun began to set. My phone buzzed again. Another text, this time from an unknown number that I assumed was Caroline using someone else's phone. "This isn't over." I took a long sip of my beer and replied, "You're right, it's just beginning." And it was. Because while securing the beach house and gathering evidence had been satisfying, they were merely the opening moves in a much larger strategy. Tomorrow, phase 2 would begin. Caroline thought she knew what was coming. A typical divorce, maybe a fight over assets, eventually a settlement. What she didn't realize was that I had spent 11 months in a combat zone, learning that the most effective operations weren't the obvious frontal assaults, but the carefully orchestrated maneuvers your opponent never sees coming. She had caught me by surprise once. It wouldn't happen again. Morning brought a flurry of activity. 3 separate calls from Blackwell updated me on Caroline's increasingly desperate attempts to regain access to the beach house. She'd already hired a lawyer, Thomas Reed, known locally as a shark who specialized in taking military spouses to the cleaners. "Reed's good," Blackwell admitted, "but he doesn't have our evidence, and he doesn't know what I know about the judge assigned to your case." "Which is?" "Judge Harmon's son is a Marine, wounded in Fallujah in '07. She's fair, but she has a particular distaste for those who don't honor their commitments to deployed service members." I smiled grimly. "That works in our favor." "Indeed. Now about that other matter you asked about, I've made some inquiries. Gabriel Fontaine entered the country on a business visa 8 months ago. Import-export business based in Monaco. Very wealthy family, old European money. He's been living in a condo in Virginia Beach, but spending most of his time down your way." "Because of Caroline." "So it seems. There's something else you should know. His visa status is complicated. He's applied for an extension, but there are some irregularities in his application." I processed this information, seeing its potential value. "Can you get me more details?" "Already working on it." My contact at immigration owes me a favor. After hanging up, I continued securing the house, changing locks and security codes. Around noon, my phone rang. Caroline's mother, Eleanor. I almost didn't answer, but decided it might provide useful intelligence. "James," Eleanor's voice was tight with controlled anger. "What do you think you're doing?" "Hello, Eleanor. I assume Caroline has given you her version of events. She told me you locked her out of her own home, that you're threatening her. James, I know you must be upset, but this behavior is—" "Did she tell you why I'm upset, Eleanor? Did she mention the man she's been sleeping with in our bed for the past 5 months while I was deployed?" Silence. Then a much quieter, "She said it was a mistake. One time." I laughed, the sound harsh even to my own ears. "One time." "I have emails, Eleanor, photos, evidence of a 5-month affair that she conducted in the house I paid for while I was getting shot at in Afghanistan." More silence. Then, "Oh, Caroline, what have you done? Ask her to show you the court papers. Eleanor, they spell it out pretty clearly." A deep sigh came through the phone. "James, I didn't know, but surely there's a better way to handle this than legal warfare." There was. She could have honored her vows. After ending the call with Eleanor, I drove to the local hardware store to purchase supplies for changing. The security system. The owner, Dave Parker, was a veteran himself, who had helped me with renovations before my deployment. "Mitchell, welcome home, brother." He emerged from behind the counter to give me a firm handshake. "How long you been back?" "Just a couple of days." Something in my expression must have tipped him off. "Everything okay?" I hesitated, then decided honesty was the best approach. Word would get around the small community regardless. "Not really. Caroline and I are separating. I need to change the locks and security system at the beach house." Dave's eyes widened slightly, but he nodded without prying. "Got just what you need. Smart locks, new security cameras, the works. I can install it all today if you want." "That would be great." As Dave gathered supplies, another customer entered, Mark Schaefer, Caroline's boss from the marketing firm. He stopped short when he saw me. "James, you're back early, Mark." I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. He shifted uncomfortably. How's Caroline? Haven't seen her in the office this week." The slight flush on his face told me everything I needed to know. He was aware of the affair, maybe more than aware. "I wouldn't know," I replied coolly. "We're not exactly on speaking terms at the moment." His eyes darted to the security equipment on the counter, understanding dawning. "I see. Well, welcome home anyway." As he hurried out, Dave returned with the last of the supplies. "That was awkward," he commented. "You noticed. Hard not to. Guy looked guilty as hell. Friend of Caroline's?" "Her boss." Dave raised an eyebrow, but didn't comment further as he rang up my purchases. Back at the beach house, Dave efficiently installed the new security system while I sorted through more of Caroline's belongings, separating what she could reasonably claim as personal property from joint assets. In her jewelry box, I found the diamond earrings I'd given her before my deployment, a matched set to her engagement ring, purchased with my signing bonus. Beside them lay a platinum bracelet I'd never seen before, with a small engraved message. "For my ocean goddess, always. G." I photographed it, adding it to the growing file of evidence. Dave finished the installation and gave me a tutorial on the new system, which included cameras covering every entrance and a smartphone app for remote monitoring. "All set," he said, pocketing his tools. "Nobody gets in without you knowing about it now." "Thanks, Dave. What do I owe you?" He waved a hand. "Military discount and, he hesitated. "The sorry your wife's a cheater discount. No charge for the installation." I looked at him sharply and he shrugged. "Small town, Mitchell. Caroline and that foreign guy weren't exactly discreet. Been seeing them at the Shoreline restaurant for months, holding hands, kissing. I wanted to say something, but it wasn't your place," I finished for him. "Yeah, for what it's worth. Most folks around here think it's pretty damn low, what she did while you were deployed." After Dave left, I sat on the deck with a beer, watching the ocean and contemplating this new information. The community knew. They'd seen Caroline and Gabriel together, watched their relationship develop while I was risking my life overseas. The humiliation burned, but it also strengthened my resolve. My phone buzzed with an email notification from Blackwell. "Call me immediately." I dialed his number. "We have a situation," he said without preamble. "Reed filed an emergency motion claiming you've denied Caroline access to necessary medications left at the residence. Judge wants a response." "It's a lie," I replied. She doesn't take any regular medications. I assumed as much, but it's a clever play. Medical necessity can override the temporary occupancy order. What do? We counter with evidence. I need you to photograph the bathroom medicine cabinets anywhere prescription medications might be kept. Show there's nothing there. I did as instructed, sending the photos immediately. 20 minutes later, Blackwell called back. Motion denied. Judge wasn't impressed with Reed's tactics, but be prepared, this is just the opening salvo. As evening fell, I received a text from an unknown number. James, it's Gabriel. We should talk, man to man. The audacity was almost impressive. I typed back, there's nothing to discuss. His response came quickly. I understand your anger, but there are things you don't know about your wife, about your marriage. I can explain. I felt a cold rage building, but kept my response measured. The only thing you can do for me is stay away from my property, as legally required. This isn't just about Caroline, he replied. It's about business opportunities. I could help you transition to civilian life, make connections. I have resources. Was he actually trying to bribe me? The desperation behind the offer was revealing. I decided to probe further. What kind of resources? My family has extensive business interests. Real estate, imports, private equity. A man with your background, your discipline, you could do very well. All I ask is a civilized resolution to this situation. Now it made sense. Gabriel wanted something, likely the beach house, given its prime oceanfront location. And he was willing to offer me a job, connections, to get it. I didn't respond, instead forwarding the exchange to Blackwell with the message, potential evidence of attempted bribery. His response was immediate. Excellent. Keep him talking if possible. This strengthens our case significantly. I looked out at the darkening ocean, the first stars appearing above the horizon. Caroline and Gabriel were getting desperate, making mistakes. They thought they were dealing with the same James Mitchell who had left for deployment, a reasonable man who played by the rules, who could perhaps be manipulated or bought off. They were wrong. That James was gone, replaced by a man who had spent months making life-or-death decisions, who had learned that hesitation gets you killed, who understood that in war you use every advantage. And this was war, a different kind, fought with legal filings instead of firearms, with evidence instead of ammunition. But the objective was the same, victory, absolute and complete. Tomorrow would bring the next phase, the most delicate part of my operation. Because while securing the beach house and gathering evidence were important, they were merely tactical objectives. My strategic goal was far more comprehensive. By the time I was finished, Caroline and Gabriel would lose much more than a house. Morning. Broke with the buzz of my phone. Blackwell again. I've got something, he said without preamble. My contact at immigration came through. Gabriel Fontaine isn't just facing visa irregularities. He's being investigated for potential customs violations related to his import-export business. I sat up straighter. What kind of violations? Nothing dramatic like drug smuggling, but serious documentation issues with luxury goods, undervaluing items to avoid proper duties, missing paperwork, possible tax evasion. They've been building a case quietly for months. And Caroline? Any connection? That's where it gets interesting. Her marketing firm handles all of Fontaine's American promotional materials, including product descriptions and valuations for customs forms. If she knowingly participated in misrepresenting values, I felt a cold satisfaction settle in my chest. She could be implicated. Potentially, nothing concrete yet, but worth investigating. After hanging up, I researched Gabriel's company online. Fontaine Luxe specialized in importing European antiques, fine art, and luxury furniture. High-value items where slight adjustments to declared values could mean significant tax savings. Caroline's marketing firm created all their promotional materials, website content, and catalog descriptions. I found myself staring at their company website, featuring professional photos of various antiques with detailed descriptions, all in Caroline's distinctive writing style. One particular section caught my attention. A collection of newly discovered 18th century French furniture pieces with suspiciously low estimated values compared to similar items I found on auction house websites. I forwarded these findings to Blackwell with a note. Possible evidence of valuation fraud? His response was immediate. Keep digging. Around noon, my security app alerted me to movement at the front door. I checked the camera feed to see Caroline standing on the porch, looking directly into the camera. She rang the doorbell repeatedly, then began pounding on the door. "James, I know you're in there! Open the door right now!" I activated the intercom feature. "Caroline, you're in violation of the court order. You need to give advance notice before coming to retrieve belongings." Her head snapped up toward the sound of my voice. "Since when do I need permission to enter my own house? This is ridiculous, James. It's all in the papers you were served. Contact your lawyer if you have questions." She ran a hand through her hair, frustration evident. "I need my things, James. My work laptop, my clothes. You can't just keep everything. Send a list of essential items. I'll have them packed and ready for pickup tomorrow with a neutral third party present, as specified in the court order." "This isn't fair. You're punishing me instead of talking to me." Her voice cracked. "I made a mistake, James. A terrible mistake, but we've been together for 8 years. Doesn't that count for anything?" I watched her on the screen, searching for genuine remorse in her expression, but finding only frustration and calculation. "It counted for me, Caroline. That's why I'm still wearing my wedding ring. Where's yours?" She glanced down at her bare left hand, then quickly hid it behind her back. I took it off because my fingers were swollen. It doesn't mean anything." "Like our vows didn't mean anything? Send your list to Blackwell's office. And Caroline, next time you come without notice, I'll call the police." I ended the intercom connection as she began to protest. Through the camera, I watched her pace the porch for several minutes, alternating between rage and tears before finally returning to her car and driving away. The confrontation left me feeling hollow. There had been a time when Caroline's tears would have undone me, when her pain would have felt like my own. Now, they seemed as calculated as everything else about her. My phone rang, a local number I didn't recognize. "Mitchell." "James, it's Mark Schaefer." Caroline's boss sounded tense. "Do you have a minute to talk?" "Interesting." "I'm listening." "I think we should meet in person. It's about Caroline and other matters." "What matters specifically?" He lowered his voice. "Things that might be relevant to your situation and to some business concerns." "Does this have something to do with Gabriel Fontaine?" There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. "How did you—" "Yes. Among other things, I considered my options. Information was power, and Mark clearly had something valuable to share, but meeting him could also be a trap. The Driftwood Cafe. 1 hour. I named a public place where we'd be seen by plenty of witnesses. Come alone. I'll be there." I arrived early, selecting a table with a clear view of the entrance and my back to the wall, habits from deployment that now seemed relevant in civilian life. Mark arrived 5 minutes late, glancing nervously around the cafe before spotting me. "Thanks for meeting me," he said, sliding into the chair across from me. He looked haggard, with dark circles under his eyes and a slight tremor in his hands. "What's this about, Mark?" He ordered coffee, waiting until the server departed before leaning forward. "First, I want you to know I had no idea Caroline was married when she and Gabriel began seeing each other." I raised an eyebrow. "She's worn a wedding ring for 8 years, and everyone at your company knows her husband is deployed." He had the decency to look ashamed. "She told us you had separated before your deployment, that the marriage was over in all but name." The betrayal cut deeper than I expected. Not just an affair, but a complete rewriting of our marriage. That's not true. I figured that out when I saw you yesterday. Your reaction wasn't that of a man who'd agreed to separate. He took a deep breath. But that's not why I asked to meet. There are problems with the Fontaine account. What kind of problems? The kind that could get people arrested. He glanced around nervously before continuing. Gabriel's company has been falsifying documentation for imported goods, undervaluing items, misclassifying them, avoiding proper duties. And Caroline's involvement? She wrote the product descriptions, created the documentation. At first, I think she was just doing her job. But over the last few months, Gabriel has had her revise values downward, change provenance information, backdate certain documents. And you allowed this? Mark looked miserable. I didn't know the extent until recently. When I confronted her, she said it was all legitimate, that Gabriel had proper documentation. But last week, I found evidence suggesting otherwise. Files. She thought she'd deleted from the server. What kind of evidence? Email exchanges where Gabriel explicitly instructs her to falsify information. Original appraisals with values much higher than what was declared to customs. And he hesitated. And what? He pulled out his phone, tapped a few times, and slid it across the table. This. I looked at the screen. A bank statement showing a transfer of $50,000 from a Cayman Islands account to Caroline's personal account. The transaction description. Simply read consulting fee. That's not from our company, Mark said quietly. Caroline doesn't do independent consulting. That's from Gabriel, separate from her salary. There have been 3 such payments in the last 4 months. I took a photo of the screen with my own phone. Why are you showing me this? Mark retrieved his phone, shoulders slumping. Because Customs and Border Protection contacted our firm yesterday. They're launching an official investigation into Fontaine Lux. They're going to find everything, and when they do, my company is implicated. So is Caroline. Now I understood his motivation. You're worried about liability. I'm worried about going to prison, he corrected. I didn't knowingly participate in fraud, but as her supervisor, I should have caught it. The best I can do now is cooperate. And bringing this to me helps you how? I thought you should know what you're dealing with. Caroline isn't just having an affair. She's involved in something much bigger. And Gabriel isn't just some rich European boyfriend. His business practices are catching up to him, and Caroline could go down with him. I studied Mark's face, assessing his sincerity. He seemed genuinely frightened, which lent credibility to his story. I appreciate the information. I'll handle it appropriately. As Mark left, I immediately called Blackwell, relaying everything I'd learned and forwarding the photo of the bank transfer. This changes things, Blackwell said, his voice tight with excitement. If Caroline is implicated in customs fraud, it strengthens our case considerably. More importantly, it gives us leverage. Leverage for what? For a settlement that goes well beyond what we initially hoped for. Mitchell, this isn't just about the beach house anymore. This is about keeping your wife out of federal prison. I stared out at the ocean, watching the waves crash against the shore. What had begun as a simple divorce case had evolved into something far more complex. Caroline hadn't just betrayed our marriage, she had potentially committed federal crimes, and while I had no interest in protecting her from the consequences of her actions, this new information presented strategic possibilities I hadn't considered before. What's our next move? I asked Blackwell. We gather more evidence, quietly. Then we approach Reed with what we know. Before the federal investigation becomes public, if Caroline cooperates fully and immediately with the authorities, it could mean the difference between jail time and probation. That's our leverage. I ended the call and sat watching the ocean, processing this new reality. Caroline had gambled everything, our marriage, her career, her freedom, for Gabriel and his money. Now the house of cards was collapsing, and I was in position to control exactly how it fell. The next morning, I woke to an email from Blackwell containing a detailed background report on Gabriel Fontaine. The information confirmed what we already suspected, but added concerning details. 3 previous customs investigations in Europe, all settled quietly with fines. A pattern of romantic relationships with employees or business associates. A family fortune that, upon closer inspection, wasn't nearly as substantial as Gabriel liked to portray. He was wealthy, but leveraged to the hilt. My security app chimed. Caroline had sent her list of essential items she needed from the house. The list was extensive, including not just clothes and toiletries, but artwork, expensive electronics, and financial documents. I forwarded it to Blackwell with a note. Thoughts? His response was quick. Clothes, personal care items, and medical. Necessities only. Nothing of significant value, and absolutely no documents. Scheduled pickup tomorrow at 2 p.m. I'll send my paralegal as the neutral third party. I began gathering the approved items, placing Caroline's clothing and personal care products in boxes. As I worked, I found more evidence of her affair. Hidden Valentine's card from Gabriel tucked into her sweater drawer. A burner phone taped under her lingerie. Receipts for expensive dinners on dates I was supposedly calling her from Afghanistan. Each discovery should have hurt, but instead, I felt an odd detachment, as if I were investigating a stranger's life rather than unraveling the remnants of my own marriage. My phone rang. Major Wilson. Mitchell, how's civilian life treating you? Interesting, sir. Not quite what I expected. Blackwell filled me in. Sorry about your situation. He cleared his throat. That's not why I'm calling. Got something that might interest you. Position just opened up with Marshall Security, private contractor, specialized protection for corporate executives. They need someone with your background. Pays excellent, work is steady. I considered it. I appreciate the lead, sir, but I'm in the middle of this divorce situation. That's exactly why you should consider it. Shows the court you have solid employment prospects post-military. Besides, companies based in Norfolk, far enough from your beach town to give you space, close enough to handle your legal matters. He had a point. Part of Caroline's inevitable counter-strategy would be to portray me as financially dependent on my military pension and benefits. I'll look into it. Thank you, sir. One more thing, Wilson added. This Fontaine character. I made some inquiries. He's not just on customs radar. Treasury's Financial Crimes Unit has a file on him too. Might be worth mentioning to Blackwell. After ending the call, I contacted Blackwell with this new information. He was intrigued but cautious. This complicates things. If multiple federal agencies are investigating, we need to be careful not to interfere. But it also gives us more leverage. What's our play? Let's meet this afternoon to discuss strategy. In the meantime, I suggest accepting that job offer. Financial independence strengthens your position considerably. I called the number Wilson had provided and arranged an interview with Marshall Security for the following week. Then I continued preparing Caroline's belongings for pickup, carefully photographing everything I packed as evidence of compliance with the court order. Around noon, my security system alerted me to movement on the beach side of the property. The camera showed Gabriel walking along the shoreline, stopping to stare up at the house. He was just outside the property line, technically not violating the order but clearly sending a message. I watched on the monitor as he deliberately took several steps onto our private beach section, now in clear violation of the restraining order. He stood there for nearly 5 minutes, occasionally looking directly at the house as if challenging me to respond. I recorded the entire incident, then called Blackwell. He's testing boundaries, Blackwell said after I described the situation. Seeing if you'll enforce the order or if it's just a paper threat. Should I call the police? Not yet. Document everything, but save that card for when we need it. Every violation strengthens our case." I agreed and ended the call, continuing to monitor Gabriel through the security system. Eventually, he retreated back to the public beach and walked away. The encounter left me with a critical decision to make. I could pursue maximum punishment for both Caroline and Gabriel, push for criminal charges, ensure she lost everything in the divorce, expose their affair and potential crimes to everyone. We knew it would be satisfying, a form of justice for the betrayal, or I could use this leverage strategically to secure my own future while extracting myself from the toxicity of their actions. Less emotionally gratifying, perhaps, but potentially more beneficial in the long run. I sat on the deck, watching the same ocean view that Gabriel had been staring at earlier. What did I really want from this situation? Revenge, justice, or simply a clean break and the freedom to rebuild? The beach house had once represented our future together. Now, it symbolized Caroline's betrayal, but also my leverage. Was it worth fighting for the property itself or what it represented? My thoughts were interrupted by a text from an unfamiliar number. "This is Eleanor, Caroline's mother. I need to speak with you. It's important." I hesitated, then responded, "What about?" "Not over text. Can we meet? I have information about Gabriel." "You should know. Another source of intelligence. Or a trap." Eleanor had always been fond of me, but her loyalty would ultimately lie with her daughter. "Sandy's Diner, 4 p.m., I replied, choosing again a public location where we would be seen by others. As I prepared to leave for my meeting with Blackwell, I made my decision. This wouldn't be about punishing Caroline, satisfying as that might be. This would be about securing my future, protecting what I'd worked for, and ensuring I emerged from this betrayal stronger than before. Caroline and Gabriel had gambled with my life, my home, and my future. They had assumed I would either never discover their betrayal or would be too destroyed by it to fight back effectively. They had severely underestimated what 11 months in a combat zone teaches you when facing an enemy who has attacked without provocation or mercy. You don't just defend, you strike back with overwhelming force at their most vulnerable point. In Caroline and Gabriel's case, that wasn't their relationship, it was their freedom. Blackwell's office exuded quiet confidence. Polished mahogany, leather-bound law books, framed diplomas. He'd prepared a comprehensive strategy document which now lay open between us. "We have 3 angles of attack," he explained, tapping the paper. "First, the divorce itself. With the evidence of infidelity and our documentation of financial contributions to the beach house, we're in a strong position to secure the property and protect your assets." I nodded, flipping to the next page. Second, the customs fraud issue. Our contact at Treasury confirms they're building a case against Fontaine Lux. Caroline's involvement gives us leverage, but we need to be careful not to cross into obstruction territory. "And the third angle?" Blackwell smiled thinly. "Gabriel's visa status. My immigration contact says his business visa renewal is in jeopardy because of the customs investigation. If it's denied, he could face deportation." I considered the implications. "So he's vulnerable on multiple fronts." "Extraordinarily so. And he's brought Caroline into his mess, which means she's vulnerable too." Blackwell leaned forward. "Here's what I propose. We prepare for trial, but position for settlement. Present Caroline's attorney with enough evidence to make it clear that fighting us would be catastrophic for both her and Gabriel." "What kind of settlement?" "You keep the beach house and all assets acquired during your deployments. She gets a small cash payout, enough to start over, but nothing substantial. Most importantly, you agree not to proactively provide evidence to federal authorities regarding her involvement in Fontaine's business practices. Wouldn't that be obstruction of justice?" "Not at all. If authorities contact you, you'll cooperate fully. We're simply not volunteering information. There's a crucial legal distinction. I considered the strategy. It was clean, effective, and allowed me to secure what mattered without becoming consumed by vengeance. Let's do it. Leaving Blackwell's office, I drove to Sandy's diner for my meeting. With Eleanor, she was already there, looking older than I remembered, the stress of the situation etched into new lines around her eyes. "James," she said as I slid into the booth across from her, "thank you for meeting me. You said you had information." She nodded, glancing around before speaking. "I found something at my house when Caroline was staying with me." She left her laptop open, and I saw emails between her and Gabriel. I'm not proud that I looked, but after what you told me, she trailed off, then straightened her shoulders. "Gabriel isn't who he claims to be." "What do you mean?" "He told Caroline he comes from old money, that his business is just a passion project. But in the emails, he's desperate for cash flow. He's been pressuring her to help him move merchandise quickly, even if it means working around customs restrictions." Those were his exact words. I kept my expression neutral. Did Caroline seem concerned about this? At first, yes. She questioned the legality. But then he started sending her money, large amounts, and her objections disappeared. Eleanor's eyes welled with tears. "I raised her better than this, James. I don't know what happened to her." "She made her choices, Eleanor." "I know, and that's why I'm here." She reached into her purse and pulled out a USB drive. "I copied some of the emails. What she's doing with him, it's wrong. Not just to you, but it's illegal. I can't stand by and watch her throw her life away for this man." I stared at the small device. Eleanor was betraying her own daughter to provide me with evidence. The family fractures extended far beyond my marriage. "Why are you giving this to me?" "Because I think you're the only one who might still be able to save her from herself." She pushed the drive across the table. "I don't expect you to forgive her. I don't expect you to take her back. But if these emails go directly to authorities, she'll go to prison. If they go to you—" She left the implication hanging. I pocketed the drive. "I'll consider my options. That's all I ask." She stood to leave, then hesitated. "For what it's worth, James, you deserve better, much better." After Eleanor left, I sat alone with my coffee, turning over this new development. The USB drive felt heavy in my pocket. More leverage, more power to destroy Caroline if I chose. But Eleanor's parting words echoed in my mind. I deserved better, not just a more faithful wife, but a better ending to this chapter of my life, one that wasn't defined by vengeance or destruction. My phone rang. "Blackwell." "We've got movement," he said without preamble. "Reed contacted me requesting a meeting. Tomorrow. Caroline wants to discuss settlement terms. Already, that's fast. Something spooked them. My guess is they've learned about the federal investigation and are trying to get ahead of it." As I ended the call, another text came through from Gabriel. "I know about your meeting with Blackwell. Caroline told me everything. This doesn't have to get ugly, James. There's a solution where everyone wins." I stared at the message, anger rising. Caroline had been feeding information to Gabriel about my legal strategy, and now he thought he could negotiate directly, bypassing the attorneys. I replied, "All communication goes through lawyers now." His response was immediate. "Don't be hasty. I can make you a very wealthy man. This beach house is just the beginning. My family has real estate developments planned for the entire coastline. You could be part of something big." I forwarded the exchange to Blackwell with the message, "More attempted bribery. Also, Caroline is leaking our strategy to him." Then I drove back to the beach house, my mind racing with possibilities. Gabriel was desperate, making mistakes. Caroline was caught between loyalty to her lover and fear of legal consequences. The pressure was working. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed an unfamiliar car parked across the street. Through the windshield, I could see Caroline in the driver's seat, watching the house, watching me. I parked and got out, staring directly at her. She didn't flee or hide. Instead, she stepped out of her car and walked toward me, stopping at The edge of the property line, careful not to violate the court order. "James," she called, "we need to talk. No lawyers, no games, just us." I stood my ground, saying nothing. "Please," she continued, her voice breaking. "You don't understand what's happening. Gabriel isn't who you think he is. He isn't who I thought he was either." Interesting. Was she turning on him already? "Tomorrow," I finally said. "Blackwell's office, 2 p.m. Bring Reed." "No, not with lawyers. Just us, like it used to be." I shook my head. "Those days are gone, Caroline. You destroyed them." She took a step forward, then caught herself. "James, I'm scared. The things Gabriel asked me to do, I didn't understand the consequences. I think I'm in trouble." "Yes," I agreed calmly. "You are." The next morning dawned clear and bright, at odds with the storm brewing in my life. I had spent the night reviewing the contents of Eleanor's USB drive, dozens of emails between Caroline and Gabriel detailing their affair, their business arrangements, and most damning of all, explicit discussions about misrepresenting imported goods to customs officials. In one exchange from 3 months earlier, Caroline had written, "The valuation documents don't match the insurance papers. Won't customs notice the discrepancy?" Gabriel's response, "They rarely check, and if questions arise, we have the corrected appraisals ready. Just make sure all marketing materials use the lower values. That's all you need to worry about." I forwarded everything to Blackwell with an encrypted file transfer, then prepared for the day's confrontation. The scheduled exchange of Caroline's personal items would happen at noon, followed by the settlement meeting at 2 p.m. At 11:45, Blackwell's paralegal Diane arrived to serve as the neutral third party for the exchange. She was professional and efficient, checking the inventory against the approved list. "Everything looks in order," she confirmed, signing the documentation. "Ms. Mitchell and her attorney will arrive at approximately noon." Sure enough, at 12:02, my security system alerted me to a car pulling into the driveway. Caroline stepped out, accompanied by a sharp-dressed man I assumed was Thomas Reed. She looked nervous, fidgeting with her purse strap as she approached the house. I met them at the door, keeping my expression neutral. "The approved items are boxed and inventoried," I said, gesturing to the stack of containers in the entryway. Reed extended his hand. "Thomas Reed, I believe we'll be seeing more of each other at the settlement discussion this afternoon." I shook his hand briefly. "James Mitchell." Caroline couldn't meet my eyes as she began examining the boxes. "Where are my financial documents? My jewelry? My laptop?" "The court order specified essential personal items only," Diane interjected, her tone professional. "Clothing and toiletries. Disputed assets remain in place until resolved through settlement or court decision." "This is ridiculous," Caroline muttered, but Reed placed a warning hand on her arm. "Let's not complicate matters before our meeting, Caroline." He turned to me with a practiced smile. "We're looking forward to finding an amenable solution for everyone this afternoon." Something in his confident tone suggested he believed they had the upper hand, that they were coming to the settlement meeting with some advantage I wasn't aware of. I filed the observation away for later discussion with Blackwell. As Caroline and Reed loaded the boxes into their car, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Federal agents just arrived at Gabriel's condo. 4 cars, at least 8 agents, customs and treasury badges. I didn't recognize the number, but the message was clear enough. The federal investigation was moving faster than anyone had anticipated. I forwarded the text to Blackwell immediately with the question, "Reliable info." His response, "Confirming now. If true, changes our approach completely. Come early for pre-meeting." I watched Caroline and Reed drive away, wondering if they had any idea what was happening with Gabriel at that very moment. Their confidence suggested not. An hour later, I sat in Blackwell's office as he paced excitedly. "It's confirmed," he said, eyes gleaming with the thrill of strategic advantage. Customs and Treasury executed a search warrant on Fontaine's residence and business office simultaneously. They're seizing documents, computers, phones, everything. Does Caroline know? Not yet, but she will soon. Gabriel will certainly try to contact her. He checked his watch. They're scheduled to arrive in 45 minutes. I suggest we let them come in blind, see what they offer, then spring this on them. I nodded, processing the implications. What does this mean for our strategy? It strengthens our position enormously. If Gabriel is being actively investigated, Caroline's legal exposure increases exponentially. Reed is good, but even he can't fight federal charges with divorce maneuvers. The settlement meeting was set up in Blackwell's conference room, a neutral territory with the implied advantage of being on our attorney's home turf. I sat beside Blackwell, reviewing our adjusted strategy while waiting for Caroline and Reed to arrive. They were 10 minutes late. Caroline looked visibly shaken, her earlier confidence replaced by barely contained panic. Reed maintained his professional demeanor, but the tightness around his eyes betrayed concern. "Thank you for meeting with us," Reed began, arranging his documents on the table. "We believe we can reach a reasonable—" Caroline's phone rang, interrupting him. She glanced at the screen, her face paling further. "I need to take this," she whispered, standing abruptly. Reed placed a hand on her arm. "Not now, Caroline." Gabriel, it's important." She pulled away, stepping out of the room despite Reed's obvious disapproval. The attorney sighed, turning back to us with a forced smile. "I apologize for the interruption. As I was saying, we've prepared a settlement. Offer we believe addresses both parties' concerns fairly." He slid a document across the table. Blackwell reviewed it, his expression revealing nothing as he passed it to me. The proposal was laughable. Caroline would retain 50% ownership of the beach house with an option to buy me out over 5 years. She would receive half of my military, pension and benefits. In exchange, she would agree to a no-fault divorce with no mention of infidelity in the public record. "This isn't a starting point for negotiation," I said, sliding the document back. "This is a fantasy." Reed's smile tightened. "I understand emotions are running high, but this reflects a fair division of marital assets under state law." Blackwell cleared his throat. "Mr. Reed, are you aware that federal agents executed search warrants on Gabriel Fontaine's properties this morning?" The blood drained from Reed's face. What? Customs and Treasury. Something about import fraud, tax evasion, and falsified documentation. Blackwell's tone was conversational, as if discussing the weather. "I imagine that's what Ms. Mitchell's urgent call is about right now." As if on cue, the conference room door flew open. Caroline stood there, tears streaming down her face. "They arrested him," she gasped. "Gabriel's been arrested. They're freezing his accounts, seizing everything." Reed was on his feet immediately. "Caroline, don't say another word." He turned to us. "We need to postpone this meeting." Blackwell shook his head. "I don't think postponement serves anyone's interests, given the circumstances. In fact, I believe our settlement terms just became much more relevant." He slid our counter-proposal across the table, the one we had adjusted after learning of the federal raid. Reed scanned it quickly, his expression hardening. "This is unconscionable. You're taking advantage of a developing situation to force an unfair settlement." "On the contrary," Blackwell replied smoothly. "We're offering Ms. Mitchell protection she desperately needs right now." He turned to Caroline. "Our terms include Mr. Mitchell's agreement not to proactively volunteer information to federal authorities regarding your involvement in Mr. Fontaine's business practices." Caroline's eyes widened as the implications sank in. "You know about that?" Reed intervened quickly. "Caroline, do not respond to that." He gathered the papers, shoving them into his briefcase. "This meeting is over. We'll continue when my client is in a better emotional state." As they turned to leave, I finally spoke. "Caroline." She paused at the door, looking back at me. Think carefully about your next move. Some mistakes can't be undone. For a moment, our eyes locked, and I saw something I hadn't expected. Not just fear, but recognition. Recognition that she had severely underestimated me, and that her world was collapsing in ways she hadn't anticipated. Then she was gone. Reed ushering her quickly down the hallway, his voice low and urgent as he tried to manage the crisis that had just exploded in their faces. "Well," Blackwell said after they'd left, "that went even better than expected." I stared at the empty doorway, feeling not triumph, but a strange emptiness. What happens now? Now we wait. Reed is good at his job. Once he understands Caroline's full exposure, he'll advise her to take our deal. He patted my shoulder. The beach house is as good as yours, Mitchell, and more importantly, your future is secure. As I drove back to the beach house, a strange sense of calm settled over me. The confrontation that had just unfolded wasn't the explosive showdown I might have imagined when I first discovered Caroline's betrayal. It was something more potent, a strategic dismantling of the life she had tried to build on the ruins of our marriage. Gabriel was in custody. Caroline was facing potential criminal charges, and I was finally taking back control. The next morning, local news broadcasts were filled with reports of Gabriel's arrest. The story had everything media outlets craved. A wealthy European businessman, allegations of fraud involving luxury goods, and hints of a wider network yet to be uncovered. Gabriel's mugshot appeared on screen, his usual confidence replaced by shell-shocked disbelief. I sipped my coffee on the deck, watching waves roll in as my phone rang. Blackwell. Reed reached out, he said without preamble. They want to meet. Again. Today. That was fast. Caroline's been contacted by federal investigators for questioning. Reed knows they're running out of options. 2 hours later, I sat across from Caroline in Blackwell's conference room. She looked like she hadn't slept. Dark circles under her red-rimmed eyes, hair pulled back hastily. Reed sat beside her, his earlier confidence replaced by grim resignation. "We've reviewed your proposal," he began, his tone carefully neutral. "While we find some terms excessive, my client is willing to accept the core components in the interest of resolving this matter quickly." Blackwell raised an eyebrow. "All terms are non-negotiable at this point." Reed's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Then we accept the terms as presented." Caroline remained silent, staring at the table as the attorneys discussed logistics, paperwork to be signed, timelines for asset transfers, details of the settlement that would dissolve our 8-year marriage in a matter of days. As the meeting concluded, Caroline finally spoke. "Can I have a moment alone with James?" Reed looked alarmed, but Blackwell glanced at me for confirmation. I nodded. 5 minutes, Reed said reluctantly, following Blackwell out. When the door closed, Caroline finally met my eyes. "I know you won't believe me, but I am sorry." I said nothing, waiting. I never meant for any of this to happen. With Gabriel, with the business. She trailed off, then tried again. It started so innocently. He was charming, attentive. "You were gone for so long, and I was lonely." "That's an explanation, not an excuse," I said quietly. Tears welled in her eyes. "I know. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just need you to know that I didn't set out to hurt you. I got caught up in something that spiraled out of control, like the customs fraud." She flinched. I didn't understand what he was asking me to do at first. By the time I realized I was already implicated. He said no one would find out, that everyone in the industry does it. I leaned forward. "You had choices, Caroline, every step of the way." "Yes," she whispered, "I did, and I made all the wrong ones." For a moment, I saw a glimpse of the woman I had once loved, vulnerable, honest, stripped of pretense. But it was too late for that to matter. "I hope you get a good lawyer for the federal investigation," I said, standing to leave. "You're going to need one, As I reached the door, she called after me, "James, the beach house. Take care of it. It really was my dream too once." I paused, hand on the doorknob, but didn't look back. Goodbye, Caroline. Walking out of that room felt like emerging from a long, dark tunnel. The divorce wasn't final, the paperwork not yet signed, but in all the ways that mattered, it was over. The next week passed in a blur of paperwork, signatures, and legal proceedings. The expedited divorce was granted, with the judge clearly sympathetic to my situation as a returning service member. The beach house and all assets acquired during my deployments remained mine. Caroline received a modest cash settlement, enough to start over, but nothing compared to what she might have expected from a standard divorce settlement. Gabriel remained in federal custody, denied bail due to flight risk. According to news reports, investigators had uncovered evidence of systematic customs fraud spanning years, with potential tax evasion charges still pending. Caroline had been interviewed twice by federal agents, but not yet charged, the result, I suspected, of information she was providing about Gabriel's operations. One afternoon, as I sat on the deck watching the waves, Dave from the hardware store stopped by with a housewarming gift, a new American flag to replace the one Caroline and I had hung together. "Figured you might want a fresh start," he said, helping me mount it on the porch post. "Town's been talking about what happened. Most folks are on your side for what it's worth." "I appreciate that," I said, stepping back to admire the flag, snapping in the ocean breeze. "What's next for you?" Dave asked. "Staying around here?" I had been considering that question myself. The beach house was legally mine, free and clear. But it carried memories, not all of them painful, but many now, tainted by betrayal. "I've got a job interview with Marshall Security next week," I told him, "based in Norfolk. Good outfit, my cousin works for them." Dave nodded approvingly. "But that's a commute from here." "I'm thinking of keeping this place as a weekend retreat," I explained. "Maybe rent it out part-time. I need some distance, but I'm not willing to give it up." After Dave left, I walked along the shoreline, considering the deeper truths revealed by the past few weeks. I had gone to Afghanistan believing I was fighting for our future, for the dream represented by this beach house. Caroline had seen my deployment as abandonment, an excuse to seek comfort elsewhere. We had been living different realities all along. My phone buzzed with a text from Major Wilson. "Marshall Security impressed with your resume. Informal offer coming. Also, Treasury agent says your cooperation was instrumental. You did good, Mitchell." I stared at the message, reflecting on how much had changed in such a short time. 2 weeks ago, I had returned home hoping to surprise my wife with my early arrival. Instead, I had discovered betrayal so complete it had shattered the foundation of my life. Yet here I stood, watching the same ocean that had witnessed our beginning now, overseeing our end. The beach house was mine. My financial future was secure. A new career waited for me. And Caroline was facing the consequences of her choices, both in our marriage and in her involvement with Gabriel's schemes. I had entered this battle prepared for a scorched earth campaign, ready to destroy everything to punish those who had betrayed me. But somewhere along the way, the objective had changed. This wasn't about vengeance anymore. It was about justice, about consequences, about rebuilding. As the sun began to set, painting the water in shades of gold and crimson, I realized something profound. I was free, not just from a faithless marriage or financial entanglement, but from the need for revenge that had initially driven me. The beach house stood behind me, not as a symbol of what I'd lost, but as a testament to what I'd fought for and won: my house, my future, my choice. 1 month after my unexpected homecoming, I stood in the beach house living room, surveying the changes I'd made. New furniture replaced pieces Caroline and I had chosen together. Fresh paint covered the walls. The photographs that had chronicled our relationship were gone. replaced by landscapes I'd taken during my travels. The house was transformed, much like I was. My interview with Marshall Security had resulted in a job offer, better than expected, with responsibilities that would utilize both my military experience and leadership skills. I'd start in 2 weeks. I had decided to keep the beach house, but had also leased an apartment in Norfolk near the company headquarters. The dual arrangement felt right, a foot in my new life while maintaining ownership of what I'd fought for. My phone buzzed with a news alert, one I'd set up to track developments. In Gabriel's case, the headline made me pause. European businessman agrees to plea deal in customs fraud case. The article detailed how Gabriel had agreed to plead guilty to reduced charges in exchange for cooperation with authorities investigating a larger network of import fraud. He would serve 18 months in federal prison, pay substantial fines, and face deportation after completing his sentence. There was no mention of Caroline, but I knew what it likely meant. She had made her own deal, providing evidence against Gabriel in exchange for immunity or reduced charges. She had betrayed him as readily as she had betrayed me. As I contemplated this news, an unmarked envelope arrived, delivered by courier requiring signature. Inside was a handwritten letter from Caroline James. By the time you read this, I'll be on my way to my parents' home in Arizona. As part of my cooperation agreement with federal authorities, I've agreed to testify against Gabriel and others involved in his business operations. I won't ask for your forgiveness. I don't deserve it, and you've moved on as you should. But I want you to know that losing you, losing us, has forced me to confront who I've become. I barely recognize that person. The beach house was always your dream more than mine, though I didn't realize it until too late. I'm glad it remains yours. Build the life there that you deserve, one with someone who values your sacrifices and understands your worth in ways I failed to. I've instructed my attorney to forward any remaining personal items of sentimental value. That may still be at the house. There's no need to respond. Goodbye, James. Caroline. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. It wasn't an apology, not really, but it was an acknowledgement of my worth, of her failure, of the finality of our parting. Standing at the crossroads of my old life and new beginning, I felt no satisfaction in Caroline's downfall or Gabriel's imprisonment. Their choices had led to their consequences, just as my choices were now shaping my future. That evening, I attended a gathering at Dave's house, a small, welcome-home barbecue with locals who had supported me throughout the ordeal. Among them was Lisa, a marine biologist who had recently moved to the area to study coastal ecosystems. We talked easily about the ocean, about service, she had been in the Peace Corps, about new beginnings. When she asked about the beach house, I surprised myself with my answer. It's a place with history, but also with potential. Like most things worth fighting for. Her smile suggested she understood what I meant. As the sun set over the water, casting long shadows across the beach, I recognized that I stood at a true crossroads, not just between past and future, but between holding on and moving forward. The beach house had been worth fighting for. Now it was time to decide what else was. 6 months later, I stood on the deck of the beach house, watching a winter storm roll in over the Atlantic. The grey clouds mirrored the ocean below, creating a seamless canvas of restless power. I'd always loved the beach in winter. The solitude, the raw energy, the reminder that nature follows its own course, regardless of human concerns. My life had fallen into a comfortable rhythm. The position at Marshall Security had evolved into a leadership role where I managed a team of former military personnel, providing executive protection for corporate clients. I spent weekdays at my Norfolk apartment and weekends at the beach house, a balance that suited me perfectly. Gabriel's case had concluded with barely a ripple in the news. 18 months in federal prison, followed by deportation. His empire Dismantled by federal authorities, Caroline had testified as promised and received probation for her cooperation. According to Eleanor, with whom I maintained occasional contact, she was working in her father's accounting firm in Arizona, rebuilding. Her life far from the coast. The legal epilogue to our marriage had long since closed, but today marked a different kind of conclusion. Blackwell had called that morning to inform me that Caroline's testimony in the final related case was complete. The last thread connecting us to our shared past had been severed. "You shocked everyone, you know," Blackwell had said before hanging up. "When you first walked into my office, I expected another revenge story. Instead, you orchestrated one of the most strategic divorces I've ever handled. You got everything you deserved without becoming someone you'd regret." His words had stayed with me throughout the day. When I'd first discovered Caroline and Gabriel in our beach house, I had wanted to destroy them, to make them suffer as I was suffering. Yet somewhere along the way, that burning need for vengeance had transformed into something more measured, a desire for justice, for reclaiming what was rightfully mine, for building something new from the ashes. The doorbell rang, pulling me. And from my thoughts, Lisa stood on the porch, wrapped in a blue coat that matched her eyes, carrying a bottle of wine and takeout from our favorite seafood place. "Thought you might want company to watch the storm," she said, smiling as I welcomed her in. Our relationship had developed slowly, naturally, over shared dinners and long walks on the beach. She understood the value of patience, of building trust, brick by brick, rather than rushing towards something that might not last. As we sat by the fireplace, watching the storm through the large windows facing the ocean, Lisa asked about my day. "It feels like a chapter ending," I said, explaining Blackwell's call, the last connection to that part of my life. She nodded, understanding without needing every detail. "And how does that feel?" I considered the question, watching the waves crash against the shore, like closing a book you never expected to read but somehow needed to. The beach house had witnessed betrayal, confrontation, and calculation. Now it was witnessing something else: healing, connection, possibility. What had once been a symbol of everything I'd lost had become the foundation for everything I might gain. Outside, the storm continued its assault on the coastline, powerful and unrelenting. Yet inside, I felt a profound calm. The battle was over. I had fought for what mattered and emerged not just victorious, but whole. What had shocked everyone wasn't just how I'd handled Caroline's betrayal, it was that I'd refused to let it define me. In the end, that was the most important victory of all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.